Here's a strange question. What are the meaning of our words? For instance, when I say that the truck is red, what exactly do I mean by this? Now, you might think this is a silly question, and this is the sort of thing that gives philosophers a bad name, kind of give us a bad reputation for asking questions that nobody really cares about. But remember, philosophers don't only ask questions about the meaning of life, or, why am I here? What's the meaning of existence? These big questions are important, but we also ask questions about the little things, the small things that we take for granted that nobody really always ever thinks about. Like, what are the meaning of our words? And it turns out that this particular question has a really deep and rich history. It goes all the way back to the Greek philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. For instance, Socrates was somebody that was interested in asking deep, probing questions about things that we take for granted, like justice or truth or knowledge. And he wanted to try to show that what we typically think we mean by something like virtue or knowledge cannot possibly be correct. Right, so he's trying to show why our general understanding of certain concepts need to be rethought. So when we ask what are the meaning of our words, we can't merely go with what the definition is, because the definition might not be sufficient, right? We might think, well, this is an easy question to answer. I just open up the dictionary. The dictionary tells me what a truck is and what red is or whatever else. But when we start doing a philosophical analysis of these terms, it's not exactly clear what the meaning is. And so now we have this question, what is meaning? So Socrates and Plato tried to answer this question. Aristotle also thought this was a really important question. And if you think about it, Aristotle's way of approaching this issue really gets at the heart of what a human being is. Aristotle said that a human being is a rational animal. And the word he uses for rational here is logos. Now, logos in the Greek means something like speech or talking or reason or logic, the ability to communicate. Right? So when Aristotle says that a human being is a rational animal, we can interpret him as saying something like, a human being is an animal that has the ability to talk, the ability to speak. He has logos. A human being is an animal that has meaning. So we have this question, what is meaning? What do we mean by meaning? So let's return to my statement, the truck is red. Now, this sentence is a conjunction of a bunch of symbols, right? We've got the T, the H, the E, and so on and so forth. There's nothing inherently meaningful about these symbols. They're just marks on the whiteboard. And, I can put marks on the whiteboard all day long, but these don't have any meaning. So why do these marks have meaning, but these marks don't? It's not immediately clear why we should say these count as meaningful. Likewise, we can also say the same exact sentence, but using entirely different symbols, different marks. For instance, I can say in French, le comment est rouge. Right? So here, le comment est rouge means the same thing as the truck is red, but we're using different marks, different symbols. And when I say it, my vocal cords are working in a different way. Why do these things count as meaningful when scribbles don't? One way that we can try to answer this is by pointing to what's known as a proposition. Philosophers understand a proposition as being the meaning of words, right? So we got different symbols here for le Camon as rouge and the truck is red. But both of these sentences refer to or pick out the same thing. So what is that thing? It's a proposition, where what we mean by a proposition is something like an abstract object. It's not located in space and time. It's not something you can go out there and discover. It's like a number or a set. It doesn't have any location. Nonetheless, it is that thing, whatever it is, that these sentences pick out or refer to. That's its meaning. That might be one way to try to solve the problem, but nonetheless, we still have the same problem. This raises the same exact question. Instead of asking what is meaning, what do these words mean, now we're asking what is a proposition, right? It's not immediately clear what a proposition is. It's not clear how it's helpful to say it's an abstract object of some sort. Well, if it's not located in space and time, if I can't touch it, if I can't go out and discover it, then what exactly is it? It's not clear. And so it seems like by appealing to something like propositions in order to answer the question of what is meaning only pushes the problem back a further step. So instead, maybe we could say, well, what we mean by a proposition is something like a concept, where instead of being located nowhere, instead of being an abstract object, we can say, well, it's a psychological object of some sort. The concept is located in your mind, right? And so now we're getting a little bit more substance, putting a little more meat on the bones of what we mean by meaning. But when you look in somebody's brain, it's not as if there's concepts located there. And it's not as if there's something I can point to when I say my psychology. All I have is my behavior and chemicals moving around in my nervous system. So how is it going to be helpful to say that a proposition is a concept? That's not immediately clear either. And so again, we seem to be pushing the problem just one further step backwards. So it's not as if I'm going to be able to give an answer for you right now. Philosophers to this day continue to debate about what exactly we mean by meaning. But what I do want to suggest is that it's a really, really deep and important question. For instance, Aristotle thought that humans are rational animals, and Plato and Socrates thought that language is important because language helps us carve reality at its joints. There's something about language and about meaning that works as a kind of a guide to the way reality is, a guide to the way, to the metaphysical structure of the world, you might say. So when I say language carves reality at its joints, that's like saying, well, look, there's objects or substances, and those objects and substances have properties, right? So when I say the truck is red, I've got an object or a substance of some sort, the truck. And I also have a property of that object, the redness of the truck, right? So this is known as predication. So insofar as I can describe the truck, the object truck, as being red, I'm attributing to it a certain property, right? And that's known as predicating. To say that it is red is attributing a predicate. And you might think, well, every time we have a meaningful predicate, right? If it makes sense, if it's meaningful to say the object truck is red, then that has to pick out some actual property in the world, some actual redness of the truck. And so if that's true, if our language can help us describe the way the world actually is, well, then it looks like it's carving reality at its joints. Again, what is predication? What exactly do we mean by this? What does it mean to attribute a property to something? We're just pushing the problem back a further step. We're not really giving an answer. And so that's why this problem is so difficult. Now, some philosophers take a different sort of approach. These are known as the ordinary language philosophers. For instance, Wittgenstein thought, when we're talking about meaning, all we're really interested in is the use of words, right? Meaning just is use for Wittgenstein. So when I say the truck is red, the meaning comes from the way I'm using the words. It's a kind of a game that we play governed by various rules like the grammar of the language, right? So we've got some community of speakers and we all agree about what trucks are and we agree about how to use the word red. And insofar as we're all in some sort of at least implicit agreement about how to use these words, then we can get meaning because the meaning is just the way we're using them. And we're all born into situations where, there's already a social environment there that enables us to come to some use, some way of behaving such that we're able to understand what we mean when we say the truck is red. That might be a really helpful way of thinking about what we mean by meaning. Nonetheless, someone like Wittgenstein and other philosophers along these lines took this too far. So for Wittgenstein, not only is meaning understood as use, right, governed by particular rules in a community of speakers, but Wittgenstein thought that all of philosophy is merely getting a better understanding of the use of language, right? All of philosophy can be simply reduced to the use of language, right? So think about some of the most difficult philosophical questions like whether God exists, whether or not we have free will, whether we have moral responsibility. These deep, puzzling problems in philosophy, Wittgenstein thought we can solve it not by solving it per se, but by dissolving the problem. All we need to do is uncover the meaning of our words through an analysis of how we're using our words in this kind of a language game. And when we do that, then we can get a better grip on what exactly these deep philosophical problems are. In fact, Wittgenstein would say we get rid of the problems in the first place. Wittgenstein had this really nice picture of philosophy where he thought that people doing philosophy was like a fly that was stuck in some ointment. Right? So when the fly tries to get out of the ointment, it flaps its wings and the fly only drives itself even further deep into the ointment and when it's trying to get out. For Wittgenstein, philosophers are doing the same thing. When we're trying to answer or solve these deep problems about, whether we have free will, what are the meaning of our words, instead of solving the problem, we only make the problem worse for us. And so he thought that we needed to get rid of the problem, right? And we do that by trying to get a better grip on the use of our language. Now, you might be suspicious of this. You might think, no, these questions of what is a proposition, what is a concept, do we have free will, does God exist? All of these questions are deep philosophical questions that we cannot solve simply by an analysis of the way we're using certain words. I'll leave it up to you to think about this in more detail. But at this point, I want you to watch the other videos to think more about some of the ways that philosophers have attempted to solve this problem and then answer the questions.